Some people have a quiet rule they live by. It is not something they announce. It is not written anywhere, but it is deeply embedded in who they are. They simply refuse to tolerate disrespect. Not loudly, not dramatically, not with endless arguments. They just don't stay where it exists. To some people, this behavior is confusing. Why would someone walk away from a job that pays well? Why would someone leave a relationship instead of trying harder? Why would someone cut ties with people who have been in their life for years? From the outside, it can look impulsive, but psychologically, it is usually the opposite. People who refuse to accept disrespect often operate with a very strong internal standard, and that standard is not about ego. It is about dignity. These individuals tend to have something psychologists call self-concept clarity. That means they have a clear understanding of who they are, what they value, and how they expect to be treated. Because of this clarity, they notice something many others ignore. They notice small signals, a dismissive tone, a pattern of broken promises, a subtle lack of respect in how someone speaks to them. While others may brush these things aside, these individuals pay attention, not because they are overly sensitive, but because they understand something important. Small signs of disrespect rarely stay small. They grow. People who refuse to tolerate disrespect often have a strong awareness of patterns. They do not only listen to what people say, they watch what people do repeatedly. They notice when effort is one-sided. They notice when their presence is taken for granted. They notice when someone becomes comfortable speaking to them in ways they would never accept from others. And once they notice that pattern, something shifts internally, not in anger, but in clarity. They begin to understand that respect is not something you beg for. It is something that exists naturally in healthy environments. Psychologically, these individuals often have a very strong sense of personal boundaries. Boundaries are not about controlling other people. They are about defining what behavior you will and will not accept in your space. People who refuse disrespect usually learn this lesson early in life, sometimes through painful experiences. They may have once tolerated too much. They may have once given endless chances. They may have once believed that patience alone could change someone's behavior. But over time, they realized something powerful. You cannot teach someone to respect you by tolerating their disrespect. And once that realization settles into someone's mind, it becomes very difficult to ignore. People who walk away from disrespect are often misunderstood. They may be labeled as difficult, too proud, too independent, too sensitive. The psychology tells a different story. These individuals usually possess high levels of emotional awareness. They are deeply aware of how environments affect their mental state. They notice when they begin feeling drained after interactions. They notice when conversations leave them feeling smaller rather than stronger. They notice when their confidence slowly erodes in certain environments. Emotionally intelligent people pay attention to these signals. They treat them as information, and when the information becomes clear, they act. Another psychological trait common among people who refuse disrespect is internal validation. Many people rely heavily on external approval. They want to be liked. They want to avoid conflict. They want to maintain harmony even when that harmony costs them their self-respect. But people who refuse disrespect tend to operate differently. Their sense of worth comes from inside. They do not need everyone to approve of them. They do not need to be understood by everyone. What they need is alignment with their own standards. And if an environment consistently violates those standards, they will eventually remove themselves from it. Even when it is difficult, even when it hurts, even when others do not understand. Another interesting psychological pattern appears when you observe how these individuals respond to disrespect. They rarely react immediately. They observe first. They give space. They watch whether behavior changes. They pay attention to whether the other person shows accountability. In many cases, they actually give more patience than people realize. But what they do not do is remain in a cycle forever. Once they see that disrespect is not accidental but habitual, they begin emotionally detaching. This detachment can seem sudden to outsiders. One day they were fully present. The next day they appear calm, distant, resolved. But that emotional shift usually happened long before the final decision. Their mind has already processed the pattern. Their brain has already calculated the emotional cost. And when the cost becomes too high, they walk away. Not because they are dramatic, but because they are clear. There is another psychological factor that shapes people who refuse disrespect. It is something called identity protection. Human beings have an internal image of who they are, what they deserve, what kind of life they want to live. When people remain in environments where they are constantly belittled, dismissed, or disrespected, that internal identity begins to weaken. Confidence slowly fades. Self-doubt begins to grow. The person they once were starts disappearing. People who refuse disrespect are very protective of that inner identity. They understand that staying in the wrong environment long enough can change who you become, and they refuse to let that happen. So when they walk away, it is not just about escaping discomfort. It is about protecting their sense of self. Many people believe strength means enduring anything, but psychological strength is not unlimited tolerance. Real strength includes the ability to recognize when a situation is no longer healthy. People who refuse disrespect have often reached a point where their self-respect is stronger than their fear of losing something. That is a powerful psychological shift, because fear is one of the main reasons people remain in toxic situations. Fear of losing the job, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of what others will say. But individuals who refuse disrespect eventually reach a different conclusion. They realize that losing themselves is far worse than losing the situation. And once someone reaches that realization, their decisions become much clearer. They no longer negotiate with behavior that violates their dignity. They no longer try to prove their worth to people who refuse to see it. They simply move forward. Interestingly, these individuals are often the same people who show the most respect toward others, because they understand its value. They speak carefully. They listen. They consider how their actions affect people around them. But precisely because they treat others with respect, they expect the same standard in return. And when that standard disappears, their tolerance disappears with it. This does not mean they never feel hurt. Walking away is rarely easy. There is often sadness, sometimes anger, sometimes disappointment, especially when the person or environment once meant something important, that they understand something crucial. Respect is not optional in healthy relationships. It is the foundation. Without it, everything else eventually collapses. And so they choose something many people struggle to choose. They choose themselves, not in arrogance, not in selfishness, but in dignity. They understand that protecting their mental health is not selfish. Protecting their peace is not selfish. Protecting their self-respect is not selfish. It is necessary. And once someone learns to live with that level of clarity, their life begins to change. They stop chasing environments where they are tolerated. They begin seeking environments where they are valued. They stop trying to shrink themselves to fit into uncomfortable spaces. They begin building spaces that fit them naturally. And the people who belong in their lives recognize that immediately, because respect does not need to be negotiated between healthy individuals. It simply exists. So if you are someone who refuses to accept disrespect, if you are someone who walks away instead of begging to be treated better, if you are someone who protects your dignity even when it costs you relationships, opportunities, or comfort, psychology would not call you difficult. Psychology would call you self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and deeply aligned with your own value. Because the truth is this: the people who refuse disrespect are not losing anything when they walk away. They are removing themselves from environments that were never worthy of them in the first place. And once they do that, they finally create space for something better: respect, peace, and relationships that never require them to question their worth.